Oh Canada, land of the free, home of the brave, and apparently the place where political drama is spicier than a double-double with extra sass. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where we break down the chaos of Parliament Hill so you don't have to suffer through question period yourself. Today, we're diving into Pierre Poilievre's exclusive sit-down with Brian Lilley, where he spilled the tea on Alberta's MOU, threw some serious shade at Mark Carney's pipeline promises, and basically gave us a masterclass in political skepticism. Buckle up, because this is about to get very Canadian, very fast. So picture this, Pierre Poilievre, sitting down for his year-end interview, probably thinking about how he's spent another 12 months roasting the Liberals like they're marshmallows at a cottage bonfire. Brian Lilley asks him about the Memorandum of Understanding with Alberta, and you can practically see the wheels turning. Because here's the thing about moves in Canadian politics, they're like New Year's resolutions. Everyone's super excited about them in the moment, they sound really impressive when you announce them, and then 3 months later, nobody remembers they exist. But this one's different. This one involves Alberta, pipelines, and Mark Carney, which is basically the Canadian political equivalent of mixing Mentos and Coke. Let's talk about this MOU for a second, because if you're not deeply entrenched in the weird world of federal-provincial relations, you might be wondering what the big deal is. A Memorandum of Understanding is basically a fancy handshake, a document that says, hey, we agree that we should probably work together on this thing, without actually legally binding anyone to do anything. It's the political equivalent of saying we should totally hang out sometime, and then never actually making plans. In this case, the MOU with Alberta is supposed to be about energy cooperation, economic development, and all those buzzwords politicians love to throw around when they want to sound productive without actually committing to anything concrete. Now, Poilievre's take on this is where things get interesting, because he's not just looking at the MOU itself, he's looking at who's involved and what their track record actually shows. And this is where Mark Carney enters the chat. For those who don't know, Mark Carney is basically the golden boy of Canadian economic policy. Former Bank of Canada governor, former Bank of England governor, the guy's resume is longer than a Canadian winter. He's been floating around as a potential Liberal leadership candidate, he's got connections that would make a LinkedIn influencer jealous, and he talks a big game about climate action and economic transformation. Sounds great, right? Well, not if you're Pierre Poilievre. Because here's where Poilievre drops the MIC. During this interview, he basically says, look, I don't believe Mark Carney is serious about building a new pipeline. And before you think this is just partisan mudslinging, let's actually examine why he's saying this. Carney has positioned himself as this champion of the green transition, right? He's been talking about net zero economies, climate finance, and all the things that make environmental activists swoon and oil and gas workers break out in a cold sweat. So when someone with that track record suddenly shows up talking about energy cooperation with Alberta, the province that's basically built on oil sands and beef jerky, you can understand why eyebrows are raised higher than rent prices in Toronto. Poilievre's argument is basically this: you can't have it both ways. You can't spend years positioning yourself as the guy who's going to lead Canada away from fossil fuels and then suddenly pivot to yeah, we should totally build more pipelines when it's politically convenient. It's like watching someone who's been vegan for 5 years suddenly show up at a steakhouse and ordering the biggest ribeye on the menu. Sure, people can change their minds, but you're going to get some questions. And in politics, where consistency is rarer than a Tim Hortons without a lineup, those questions matter. But let's flip the script for a second and talk about the pros of this MOU, because it's not all cynicism and skepticism, even if that's more fun. On paper, federal-provincial cooperation on energy policy is exactly what Canada needs. We're a country that's geographically massive, economically diverse, and politically fragmented like a dropped plate. Alberta's been screaming for years about getting its resources to market, British Columbia's been building barriers faster than a beaver on overtime, and Quebec's been doing its own thing as always, because of course it has. An MOU that actually brings different levels of government together to work on energy infrastructure could theoretically be a game changer. It could mean more jobs, more economic growth, more energy security, and maybe, just maybe, a way to balance environmental concerns with economic realities. The problem, and this is what Poilievre's hammering home, is that Canada has a terrible track record of actually following through on these things. We're great at announcements, we're phenomenal at photo ops, we're world-class at creating committees to study the feasibility of creating other committees. But when it comes to actually building stuff, we're slower than a snowplow on a budget cut. Look at the pipeline projects we've tried to build over the last decade. Energy East? Cancelled. Northern Gateway? Dead. Trans Mountain? That thing's been a financial and political nightmare that's cost taxpayers billions and taken longer to complete than it takes to get a family doctor in rural Canada. So when Poilievre sits down with Brian Lilley and expresses skepticism about whether Mark Carney is genuinely committed to building new pipeline infrastructure, he's not just being contrarian for the sake of it. He's looking at the pattern. He's looking at Carney's previous statements, his political alliances, his environmental commitments, and saying these things don't add up. It's like if someone who's been advocating for a car-free city suddenly announced they're opening a monster truck dealership. You'd have some questions, right? And here's where the political chess game gets really interesting. If Carney does end up running for Liberal leadership, which seems increasingly likely given how much has been hovering around Ottawa like a seagull at a beach picnic, his position on pipelines and energy development is going to be absolutely crucial. Alberta matters in federal elections. Saskatchewan matters. Even parts of BC and Ontario that depend on resource industries matter. If Carney can't articulate a coherent energy policy that doesn't alienate either the environmental wing of his party or the voters who actually work in these industries, he's going to have a problem bigger than the deficit. Poilievre's playing this smart, because he's essentially forcing the conversation now, before any leadership race officially kicks off, before positions get carefully focus grouped and polished to the point of meaninglessness. He's saying, out loud, what a lot of Canadians in the energy sector are thinking: show me you're serious. Show me this isn't just political theatre designed to win over Alberta voters while you quietly plan to regulate the industry into oblivion. It's a challenge, and it's a smart one, because it puts the onus on Carney and the Liberals to prove their commitments are real. But let's not pretend this is all altruistic concern for energy workers and Alberta's economy. Poilievre's a politician, and politicians don't waste valuable interview time on topics that don't benefit them strategically. By highlighting the contradictions in Carney's position, he's accomplishing several things at once. He's appealing to his base in Western Canada who feel perpetually ignored and misunderstood by Central Canada. He's positioning himself as the truth-teller who's willing to call out political opportunism. And he's creating a wedge issue that could divide the Liberal Party between its environmental activists and its more pragmatic economic voices. That's not just politics, that's three-dimensional chess while everyone else is playing checkers. The cons of this MOU, from Poilievre's perspective, are pretty clear. It's potentially just another empty promise in a long line of empty promises. It might give false hope to an industry that's been beaten down by regulatory uncertainty and political hostility. It could be a distraction from the fact that the current government hasn't been particularly friendly to energy development despite occasionally saying the right things. And most importantly, if it's being championed by people who have spent years advocating for the exact opposite policies, there's good reason to question how genuine it really is. What makes this whole situation even more deliciously Canadian is that it's happening against the backdrop of our eternal national identity crisis. We want to be environmental leaders, but we also want the economic benefits of resource extraction. We want to fight climate change, but we also want affordable energy and good-paying jobs. We want to position ourselves as progressive and forward-thinking, but we also have billions of dollars worth of oil in the ground and bills to pay. It's like trying to be vegan at a barbecue, theoretically possible, but you're going to make things awkward for everyone involved. Poilievre's comments in this interview are basically holding up a mirror to these contradictions and asking Canadians to take a good hard look. Are we serious about energy development or aren't we? Are we going to support our resource industries or are we going to regulate them out of existence while patting ourselves on the back for being environmentally conscious? And most importantly, are politicians going to be honest about these trade-offs, or are they going to keep pretending we can have everything we want with no difficult choices? The beauty of this interview moment is that it cuts through all the usual political speak and gets to the heart of the matter. Poilievre's not hiding behind consultant-approved talking points. He's saying what he thinks, and whether you agree with him or not, at least you know where he stands. In an era where political communication is usually more processed than grocery store cheese, that's actually kind of refreshing. It's bold, it's direct, and it's exactly the kind of thing that makes his supporters love him and his critics go absolutely bananas. As we head into what's shaping up to be a wild political year, these conversations about energy, pipelines, and economic development are only going to get more intense. The stakes are too high, the disagreements too fundamental, and the political opportunities too juicy for anyone to back down. Poilievre's drawing his lines in the sand, and you can bet Carney and the Liberals are going to have to respond. How they respond will tell us a lot about what kind of country we're trying to build and who's actually serious about building it. So there you have it, folks. Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney, Alberta moves, pipeline politics, and enough skepticism to fuel a conspiracy theory convention. If you made it this far, Congratulations, you're now more informed about Canadian energy policy than most people sitting in Parliament. If you enjoyed this breakdown, smash that like button harder than Poilievre smashes liberal talking points. Subscribe to Canadian Insights because we're dropping these videos faster than the government drops infrastructure projects, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below and let me know, do you think Mark Carney's serious about pipelines, or is this just political positioning? And hey, if you know someone who needs to understand this mess, share this video with them. Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, and stay Canadian.